Alright, so now we're going to get into lens distortion with our free Matte Painting VFX course. I'm going to go over what is expected when you're at a studio, what kind of nodes you will get, like the SD map, and how you can actually do it yourself. This will show you how to have a conversation with your leads and supes if you don't have an undistorted plate, and you can ask them what you need. I'll also show you that in certain circumstances, you'll actually have to undistort the plate yourself. So remember, not all studios are the same, and that you'll be working at small, tiny studios, boutiques, mid-size, large size, and they all do it differently. I've had to figure it out myself at certain studios, and then other studios, they just provide you with everything. So the point of this DVD is to make you a well-rounded, knowledgeable VFX artist, matte painter, because if you're that, you're extremely powerful and you can just do this stuff yourself. Now I'm going to be going over Nuke, but in the future chapter, I'll be going over the basics of Nuke, of what you'll need. It's a little bit out of order, but this fits in the section that we're doing right now.
All right, so in this lesson, I want to go over lens distortion. As a matte painter, you don't really actually have to know all the details and everything like that. For the most part, you'll be provided with an ST map, which looks like this, these weird multicolored ones, or rarely the actual real track with the full data. So basically the ST map is a simpler version that can be shared that converts to this data, all like the lens distortion that comes from the lens itself that has like the barrel distortion on the edges, and puts it into the ST map. So basically this is what I'm talking about, the lens distortion, right? All the warping from the camera lens. Especially this one over here, that you can see big time lens distortion. And what we can do as CG artists, we have to work completely undistorted. So when you work in the CG world, everything's completely perfect, right? You have straight edges everywhere. And it's a lot easier for painting to work with straight edges too. Like I'm not gonna wanna create a straight line and draw with this curve. I wanna go straight up and down and then apply the lens distortion later on to match this curve. So it'll be really hard to work in perspective when you have all this lens distortion going on. I want to go over how you use the ST maps, and I want to also show you in certain cases, I've had this happen before where they don't have time, or you aren't provided with the lens distortion, and I just had to do it manually myself, and then they get around to doing it the official way. But I was able to get away with what I needed to do. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough for what I needed. And a lot of times also on set, you shoot with a grid, right? So if I want to do this away with redrawing lines like I'm going to show you, it still won't be as good as like if they went on shot and shot this grid. And basically what it does is like this grid, if you shot it, would be distorted like I showed you in those images. And the algorithm, the computer would basically read and calculate what the lens distortion very easily. And just so you know, like these smaller boxes over here are both basically for when you zoom in, because it's not good if these boxes are large on screen. So when you zoom in, these get bigger and it's just easier for them to read. Anyway, so like if I had a project like this, for instance, like the one we're working on, and I pull in these ST maps, the way you use it is that you'll see like a distortion one and an undistorted one. And you have to type in tab ST map, right? And you plug this knob into the ST map, and then the source goes into the source that you're using. Now, if you look through it now, it looks weird. Oh wait, that's distort. I want undistort. It looks weird, all right? So we want to undistort my image. What's happening now is that in the settings on this ST map, you actually have to switch the UV channels to RGB. So now it's picking up the right colors. Now the smearing over here, so what you want to do is actually put underneath here a tab black outside. So now you can see clearly where the distortion is. And in this ST map, it automatically has, I believe, a 10% overscan included in it. So this is another thing that you just don't have to worry about anything with the ST map. The issue is that it's a little bit slower than the actual real settings in here. So I could actually just remove this and just put this here, and it should be the same, yeah. But you can see there's less overscan going on. Let me see if oh, this is already distort, so we want to go to undistort. Yeah, so it doesn't have the overscan going on in there. And I'll show you, if you want to do overscan, you can just, I'll show you the setup on here when I'm doing the lines. So when you have this, and then let's say you're painting everything, right? And you want to bring it back to distortion. So let's just let's take the distortion now over here and copy the ST map, put ST map in there, and voila, you got the same as the plate, right? So I'm looking from here to here, and they are identical, okay? So that's pretty much how it's gonna happen when you have a DMP. And after I go over this, I'll go over how to apply it to your projection setup. So let's go over in case you don't have an ST map to use, and it's crunch time and you just have to crank it out, right? Or even if you just want to do a quick concept, right? And you want the concept to be undistorted, so you just do it yourself. It doesn't have to be perfect because the final DMP will have a real actual made correct distortion, ST map or anything. What we'll do is take this over here. So there's two lens distortions. We have the lens distortion, which is the newest version, and you have the old one, which in order to get to the old one, the legacy one, which is the one that I'm actually more familiar with, you go to over here on the left side and you go to all plugins, update, and then when you go to type in lens distortion, you'll see an L next to it, and that means it's the legacy. And it doesn't have the ST map underneath it, it's just this. So you see if I double click on here, it's this information, and it's just grid detection Python node. And then on lens distortion, it actually has more options up here. And I like the line analysis. But the newer one, it does line analysis with the pen tool, but I'm sure you can YouTube it somewhere, learn more about it, but I'm more comfortable with this, and this is really all you need to know, and you're still able to grab it anyway. You can plug in the grid, if you have a grid, and just do grid analysis and analyze the grid. Or if you don't have a grid, you can actually do the line draws, line analysis. So let's delete this. We'll actually just put this up here. And the line analysis is pretty cool because you'll draw lines that are straight, that are supposed to be straight, that you think are straight. So like say if it's like a super curved, say this was super curved like that, you would draw along that line and say like, hey, that is supposed to be a straight edge. Let's undistort it, essentially. We click here for the draw mode on, so that means we'll click some points. And you don't want to click on the edge because then it will mess it up. So you actually want to click a little bit in here. You want to have at least 3 points, but for here we have a long one. And we just hit right click to draw this yellow line that's going across. And now we know that this is a straight edge. So we'll do point, point, point. And let's bring down exposure. Because it's linear, that's why it's blown out and stuff. So hit a line there, point, point, point. All the way up here, you got a good one over there. You want to have at least 3 lines. We can do this one too. To delete these points, you can hit delete last point, delete last point, delete last point. And you can also do delete last line. That should be good enough. We could actually do a horizontal. It's good to have a vertical and a horizontal. So let's do here, here, and here. It's best if it can go across the whole screen and also try to hit those edges to try to get closer to the edge. That's why I was hitting these. And then what you would do is just hit analyze lines. And now you saw a little bit of a change in here. So you can see that with the way I'm doing it here isn't as drastic as with the ST map, because that was actually calculated with a grid that I shot on set. So this is a little bit of a distortion here that cleans up, and it's good enough to start actually painting because it is making things way straighter, right? What we can do now, we have to, so if we paint on the undistorted plate, right? So let's just close this now. we're painting on this, which is cool. And then what we want to do is now we're missing information over there, right? So we have to shrink the shot. So we have to give it some overscan. So let's do a reformat. Switch this to scale and switch this to none. Well, let me just keep it at width for now. So let's say we want to open it up 10%, so 1.1, right? Right now we've done the whole thing at 1%, at 10%. So you can see the scale is now higher. To actually open it up and keep the original image intact without changing that scale, we have to switch this to none, right? So now we actually have the image shrinking in, but the canvas opening up on the outside. So now we're revealing what was hidden behind it. So this is what it was, right? So this little dotted line here is showing that this is data. As you can see, if I disable this lens distortion, is about here, right? You can kind of tell. That's data that you need to get back in there. So now when I go to reformat, you get that information back, right? So these stretching edges, like what we did before, we'll actually put a black outside here. So now you can save this out to paint on. You see the little lens distortion in here. You'll have straighter lines. It'll be a lot easier to paint on. And you have to do that. Okay, you have to always work on an undistorted plate. Okay, so if you are at work and you're working on something and they don't provide it for you, please ask your lead or soup or someone to be like, hey, do you have an undistorted plate that I can paint on? It's important, okay? Because in comp, they're going to redistort it. So if you're working on a distorted image and they're gonna distort it, double distort it, that's not good. It's not gonna work. Your projections won't stick correctly too. Sometimes, if you're doing a concept that isn't crazy distorted, that's fine. You can just, eyeball it, but it's always best to start with an undistorted plate. Now we want to be able to get this back to the original plate, right? So we take the lens distortion, copy it over, duplicate it, and there's a button here that says, right now it's telling it to undistort the plate. You actually want to uncheck it and it's saying to distort it again. So now you see off when I disable it pressing D, it's bringing it back to where it was, right? What you want to do is actually you have to reverse engineer it in a way. If I do a reformat here, and I want to pop this back into place, right, to get rid of this overscan, I bring it back to the original resolution, switch this to none, and now it's popping back. But we're not done yet. So if you notice this versus that, there's still a little bit of information that is messing up here. It's not actually identical to the original, okay? So what we have to do is actually remove this, do the reformat before the lens distortion, and switch this to none. And now you'll see that it's popped it back here. So we're at this point. We still aren't perfect. We want to now apply the lens distortion, right? And it's stretching here. Now the reason why it's stretching is because if you look at this, that extra data here, those bounding box is not showing. So that means it's just black pixels, it's nothing. So when it distorts this current image, you're gonna be stretching these little pixels on the very edge here, right? You're stretching it. So what we need to do is actually preserve the bounding box. So now you have data here. So you have to click that box, and now that is here. And then if you want to remove this little bounding box here, because you'll see now it's actually identical to the original, but just to clean things up, you can just do another reformat. And uncheck the preserve bounding box with the current accurate resolution that you're supposed to have, the original. So now it is identical. Okay, I'm going back between the plate and the new reformat. I hope that makes sense. So let's go over again. So you go plate, black outside, lens distortion, so you're distorting it so you can see the data is now expanding beyond the plate. Reformat it to get the overscan, right, with the none and 10% overscan. And then scale it back up to the original information that you're supposed to have, to then shrink the plate and then bring that extra data back in. Right, so just follow those steps and you'll get it. So now, obviously, you know, doing all this is a lot more steps compared to, hey, I have a ST map and I can just do this, right? So I actually want to show, if you have the original, where'd it go? If you have just the original information here and you do a black outside here, you can see it's missing the 10% overscan on it. So compared to just using ST map, which already has it in there. So you'd have to, it's just, you know, less steps happening when you have the ST map. So on here, on your projections, you have, let's say these are your projections, and you have overscan already built into your projections. So then you put your, let's say, distort back underneath it. So let's just get rid of this. So the distortion goes right after the projection, and now you're going to be distorting the image. Okay. Sometimes when you have this 10% baked into the ST map and you find that your projections are sliding with the plate, it really just depends from studio to studio. So I just want you to keep this in mind, that you'll have to actually go into your projection camera and add an additional 10% scan into your camera. So there's two ways to do this. Let me copy this over here. There is the window scale where you just add, it's originally just a 1, right? So you just put a 10%, so it's just 1 and then 1. Because just to take into account that 10% overscan. And then the other way is to have it like this and just get rid of animations on your aperture. No animation and no animation. And you're gonna do overscan with that one. And you just do a multiplication of times 1.1 and times 1.1. And if you want to undo that, you can just always do divided by 1.1 and divided by 1.1. So let's just double check that. So that's at 14.6, and this is now at 14.96, and this is 14.96. So they're the same, right? The 10% overscan is actually coming from if your images have overscan in your DMP. Since there's already a 10% overscan baked into the ST map, it kind of messes some things up. And it really, you know, again, it depends on what studio you're at, but it's just something to keep in mind. If you have overscan in your images and then you apply this, it will mess things up. So then you have to apply the overscan into the camera, the 10% overscan or whatever standard overscan that they have in there into these cameras. I'm giving you this information so then you'll know what kind of questions to ask your leads, and just so you can have smarter conversations with your fellow artists and soups and leads. So just keep in mind about that situation. It could cause some weird sliding going on, and one of those bug fixes that you have to figure out. If you're finding some weird things going on that's just not really sticking, just try to do that and find out, like, is there an overscan going on in the camera? It's like, you know, it just depends. Sometimes I need to do it, sometimes I don't. But for the most part, yeah, ST maps are convenient. Now, like, the whole point is to make your DMP now match the distortion with the plate. So then you just, you know, merge it on top of the plate. So that is lens distortion.